to grow a business. You have to have access to capital. You don't have it, you're toast. Because when the bad times come, you have to have the ability to have some kind of a cushion. It takes forever to build up a great team and everything else.
Welcome to the Masters of Business podcast with Daniel Beer.
All right, Dan, here we go. I'm excited to have you with us today. Dan Fetter on Masters of Business podcast. Good friend, a local business leader, and just somebody that I've long admired and gotten so much advice from personally that's helped me in my growth, my development. And it's really a treat in being able to bring him to you and share in some of that wisdom that frankly has just served me really, really well, and who's built multiple businesses along the way too. So as you know, here on the Masters of Business podcast, we focus on people across all different industries that have achieved great things, that have dominated parts and areas of business, which we find are universal regardless of industry. And so there's lessons that we can all extract instead of being cocooned or just embedded in our own industries. And with that, I just want to welcome you, Dan, to the podcast. And we'll kick it off, man.
Thank you, Danny.
Well, Dan, just really quick and kind of the very quick Reader's Digest elevator version, but it's interesting always to understand somebody's journey. When you've gone into the apartment business, you own a lot of apartments. You've actually become one of the biggest apartment owners in San Diego County, which is of course a very competitive county, a desired county, and so to be among the giants, so to speak, in San Diego County is a great feat. You didn't start there. And so what's the quick, short version of how, your journey, if you can share that, of how you ended up starting this particular business?
Sure. So Danny, thank you for having me. I've been a big admirer of you and everything that I've seen you accomplish on a personal level, of course, and on a business level. It's really great to see somebody before you had blonde hair, see how hard you worked and everything else and everything you sacrifice to achieve what you have. So
by blonde hair, by the way, guys, if you can't see me, just so you don't think I'm some guy that goes around bleaching his head or anything like that, he's talking about my grays.
I have some too, but I have less, but I'm a lot older than you.
Yeah, I know. You're doing something much better than I am.
So look, I got out of college, first job out of college. I worked for, back then it was before the internet really took off. And I remember I was graduating college and I'm walking around in the career fair and I didn't really have a lot of money. Matter of fact, I had a little over $500. And I remember thinking, I need to get a job. I'm a little time. I'm like, God, none of these things seem interesting to me. And there's never been afraid to work. And I'm like, let me turn the tables. And this was in 1998. So the economy was still kind of crappy. And so I put an ad out in the LA Times in the classified section when people still used to read the newspaper and look at classifieds. And it said, recent college graduate seeks business mentor looking for creative opportunities. And I had my beeper to it. I received 37 inquiries. What I did was I turned the tables. And I received 37 inquiries from business owners, entrepreneurs all over Los Angeles.
All right.
And it got me into a place that was, the guy worked for, very successful company at the time, doing auctions and liquidations of machine tools. So prior to 98, we had, in the early 90s, California had a tremendous amount of aerospace defense work all over. And there was a lot of plants that ended up closing down because the Cold War, if you will, was over. And the economy was really crappy back then. It was worse than the financial crisis that we went through in 2008. Back then, it was wait to 95, and then it changed to stay alive to 95, then it was wait to 98. Okay? And anyway, I got out. It wasn't a great economy. And I'm like, I need to do something different and creative. So I got a job working for a guy who was in the auction liquidation business, and how he made most of his money in that business and how that business functioned. He was really good at understanding the asset values of machine tools. And believe it or not, it was even though it was a small in terms of people. I mean, these were live auctions. Go in, he would buy the assets for cash. If they wouldn't sell the assets to him for cash, he would give them a guarantee, so structured. Anything above and beyond that, it'd be split. And if that didn't work, it had to be a big enough auction, then it was just for commission. So I learned a lot about how to assign value to assets that, frankly, most people wouldn't think about. And so my role was to go out and find opportunities. So I had to read all kinds of newspapers and look at the classified section all over the US. I had to obviously cold call and do whatever you had to do. And I had to go down to where all the manufacturers were. And I had to convince people that they should sell us the assets for something. And I didn't really know that much. He did send me to the Missouri School of Auctioneering, and I learned how to sell something via auction in person. So when I do my auction chant, it's with a twang, because it was in St. Joseph, Missouri. Most of the guys there were selling stuff via auction. They were selling it. They were selling machine tools. They were selling farm equipment. They were selling plates, estate stuff. It's just it's a big country.
I didn't know that this was how you got your auctioneering skills.
Yeah.
Because I know you are an auctioneer back in some former life. I just thought it's because your parents sent you to some strange summer camp or something.
No.
I didn't know that this is how it happened.
Well, but what's interesting about that business, especially back then, and anybody who deals in things that have intrinsic value, you get exposed to how to think about intrinsic value.
Okay.
And I used to, when I would go in and I would try to convince, I was decent at getting new business. When I would try to convince someone to sell us something or work a deal out with us, I had a baby face. So I would bring a hat with me and a briefcase. And every time they'd see me, they're like, oh man, they're very serious. It's plant managers. I mean, and plant manager, they're very sharp guys. They may be a CPA, by the way, trained, definitely have an accounting background. I mean, I did I did the deal when a company that Alcoa bought down in Riverside, they needed to liquidate. So I had this hat, and that hat would say, when I go in to meet these guys, because I want to kind of get them to relax, it said, your shit is my gold. And they loved it, because these are hardworking people. Yeah. So they're like, oh wow, okay, he's got nice clothes and everything else, but he's like a normal guy. Let me talk to the kid. And so that's kind of how that's what I started with the first year. After doing that for a year, I did well. However, the reason I joined this entrepreneur, and the reason I was interested in having an entrepreneur hire me, was the objective was to go work there for a number of years and then have an opportunity to eventually buy part of the business or be part of it. That was the whole reason, that was, at the end of the day, that's what it was. And let's just say that the initial interview process and the expectations and matched with the reality didn't match. And then I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right, I don't have any money. And by the way, the ad, I forgot to mention this, the ad cost $450. I only had $50 left. So it was it was one of those where it's like I got no extra money. So I'm like, this better work, or I got to go get a job that I don't want to do. Okay.
Love that.
Yeah. So anyways, go ahead. You were going to ask me something.
No, I got stuck thinking about this intrinsic value concept.
It makes sense.
How, and with what you're doing now, which we'll get to, but it's just interesting that you were what I'm understanding is that you were in this position where you had to see, you had to be able to judge the perceived value, I think, through other people's eyes of, you're looking at this cup, for example, that I'm holding here, and everyone else is seeing a cup, but you see what else it could be. You see how the public could perceive it, or how it could have more utility than just what everybody else is seeing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So think of it like this. I did a tour of the Tesla factory up in Northern California. And one of the things that really blew me away, this was several years ago. And I'm not the only person who thinks this, but the thing that really blew me away about Elon Musk is he had this punch press because it was an old factory. So he refurbished the punch press. Had he bought a new one, it would have been tens of millions of dollars. But he refurbished it for a couple $1,000,000 as opposed to $75 million, whatever the number was. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, sometimes people make money or they have money, but they don't always realize what it took to get somewhere. So he understood the intrinsic value. It made me smile. I'm like, man, I'm not the only person, but I'm like, this guy, I don't know what this guy's ceiling is. I just know he's going to be a superstar because he knows how to think about money and business and not just going, and he could have very easily gone out and bought this $50 or $75 million punch press. But instead he worked with what he had there for a couple $1 million. That's pretty I was pretty impressed with that decision-making. Anyway, so I did the auction business, and then a friend of mine and my brother, a friend of ours, was working in the equipment leasing and finance business.
So,
And so it's, the opportunity in that, what I understood, we didn't need a lot of money to start the business. I'd made some decent money for where I was working. And it was you cold call people out of phone books, and you look for companies that are looking to buy equipment, and you're brokering money. Well, we started initially as, let's just say there was 5,000 players in the country. We eventually grew it to where we were the largest in the US. We did more small business loans, small business leases. And that would be, in this case, call it $75,000 and below per transaction. We did more of those than I think any other institution in the United States for like a decade. And so I learned a lot about finance business and about banks and about sales and sales process. And, we went from, a couple of us to eventually, several hundred of us. And we were pretty darn good. We had some really good people. And then the financial crisis hit, and I thought we were diversified. And we were diversified, but not good enough. And we were selling these loans to all kinds of smaller banks that need to have commercial industrial loan exposure. And 80% of the banks, we had 10. We were the biggest customer, I think, of all of them. And 8 out of 10 of those all went out of business. And because the Federal Reserve decided that the capital requirements to start new banks needed to be tripled to protect things, no new players came into the market. So our business went from, we'd grown every year from the beginning, 100% plus a year, every single year. Our top line revenue was like over $120 million. And then all of a sudden we lost 80% of the business in a very short period of time. And it was nothing to do with us. It was horrible. Went through that, hired a CEO to run the company. And I'm like, okay, let me take a break. When I worked for somebody, I probably worked 60, 70 hours a week. And then in that business, I worked minimum 80, 100 hours a week. Easy. I did what you have to do to grow a business. And I thought I was so clever. We were so diversified and everything else. And I learned we weren't as clever. And sometimes when the markets change, there's nothing you can do. And it's a hard thing from an ego standpoint, because you're like, everything I've touched has gone great. What's wrong? Well, there's forces that are bigger than you. And then you can only do so much. So anyway, we hired a guy. He ran it for a number of years. I said, okay, let me spend the next X amount of time trying to figure out the next thing I want to do. But what I know is I don't want to have to travel again unless it's for fun. And I want to make sure that the next thing I get into is a steady-eddy business, because what I don't want to do is get into a business like a yo-yo again. And that's one of the problems with businesses that are easy to start. They're also, they can go up and they can go down pretty damn quickly. I call it the yo-yo effect. You think you're the king, and before you know it, you realize that no, you're not the king. There's market forces you can't control. So there's nothing to you need the alternative income, right? And you need that steady eddy. So I analyzed a bunch of stuff. At one point, my brother and I were going to buy 31 Burger Kings. Not that I have any interest in burgers necessarily, but with that franchise, you could own the real estate. And so I remember we were just in the middle of, my brother we got certified by Burger King to go buy him. And he just finished getting trained. And then it was my turn. And then there was a friend of ours who was going to mentor us. He said, listen, you're going to see something, you're going to see something come out. It's all open information, but the franchisees are suing the franchisor. And I don't know if this is such a great opportunity right now. And I'm like, damn, okay, got it. Then I said, okay, everything I keep looking at is all real estate related, but it's operating businesses. So I looked at every asset. What I said is, I said, look, I've never had a local business. The prior one was national. I think we did 3% of our business in San Diego. We just happened to be based there.
Right.
Okay. And I'm like, okay, well, gosh, this seems like a good move. How do I build a good sized portfolio over time? And everything I analyzed, so I remember I hired an economist, Alan Nevin. He's been an economist. He's the top 1 or 2 real estate economists in San Diego County. He probably has been doing it for 55 years. Super nice man. I hired him to write what's called a white paper. So help me understand the markets and each asset category. And I went one by one. And what I asked him was, first, we focus on industrial. And I said, tell me the behavior when the economy goes to hell. Go back 10 years, but tell me historically and before that, what happens? Again, with the thought process is get into something that has steady-eddy cash flows, opportunity for steady-eddy cash flows. And the other criteria was enough sales velocity, enough transactions occurring that I can build a portfolio and I can figure out how to compete. And I'm just said that's what I'm going to do, one way or another. So anyway, I got the information back. Then there wasn't enough opportunity in terms of deal velocity, meaning number of transactions that sell. Yeah. My initial thought process at the time, on paper, it sounded really great. My initial thought process at the time was, well, if I buy 10 to 40,000 square foot buildings, I can always sell them to small business owners or medium-sized business owners when it's time to exit. One problem with that thinking, that part's correct. But the other part, because there's not enough sales velocity, and the other part to thinking is I'm competing as an investor with people who are getting small business loans. So they're putting 10, 20% down. And as an investor, I'm putting 45% down. And they're doing it because they want to have an office. And I'd be doing it from an investment standpoint. So I'm competing against somebody that is an emotional buyer as opposed to a business person in that regard.
Right.
And so it's very clear to me there wasn't enough happening for me to be, build something really prolific. And then looked at a bunch of other asset categories. And then I remember sitting with Alan. I was pretty frustrated. And I remember sitting with Alan for lunch. And I'm like, Alan, there's not enough deal velocity that I'm seeing in these different asset categories. And I certainly don't want to get into office because I knew everything was changing. I didn't know to what extent, of course, but I knew it wasn't a good move. And I'm like, so let me ask you, Alan, the people who are the most generous with charities,
right,
on a consistent basis, what asset category are they in? So he says, oh, it's easy. I said, well, what is it? He says, it's apartment business. I said, great. I'm getting in the apartment business immediately. Give me a white paper so I can learn about the history and how it performs. And that's actually
why charities. Why was that an indicator for you?
Because think of it like this. If anybody can give to charity on a consistent basis, you have to have a really good business that's continuously providing cash flow. It's just a simple. So I looked at it like this. I forgot to mention, I also have to sell the last company that helped too. And I'll go into that in a second. But anybody who's in a business that is always able to give to charities consistently is in a very good business. If you take a step back and you analyze, which I have, and you analyze the owners of the different sports teams throughout the United States, almost it doesn't matter what sports team it is. A significant percentage of them are real estate folks, primarily multifamily. It's changed a little bit because you have now the technology folks coming in, which is great. But my point is, it's just a great business. The thing that screws up the business, like candidly, it's unintended consequences of poor policy decisions from a political standpoint, or people who are making policy decisions that don't understand basic economics. That is what can screw up that industry. And by the way, there's a whole, which I do want to talk about, there's a whole fallout to that that affects every business and everybody. Kind of like the mansion tax in Los Angeles, right, for example. That's the same concept. Just it's foolhardy.
It'd be interesting in a moment because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's housing, which does affect everybody. So it would be interesting in a moment to actually explore some of that. You know, what is some of that that's out there that people just need to be aware of? Because here's what I know is that if I look at any and you actually stated it, so you were very fair in what you just said, unintended consequences, is that if you look at most of what ends up going wrong, it was rooted in something good. There was some kind of good intention or idea, but there were factors, right, where a domino effect of sorts that were not properly analyzed. And certainly, who knows if they were or were not by the politicians, and they may or may not have cared, but certainly the public, for the most part, doesn't see them. Let's come back there in a moment. I actually want to go backwards for a second, Dan, and just extract a couple of nuggets here that I think are fairly meaningful, because you've laid down a lot of just gems, but within them there's some depth that we haven't really, that could go lost. Forces bigger than you said a moment ago. So you were talking about, you were in a business. It was a very successful business. You were an entrepreneur. I'm going to say that you have some degree of ego, some degree of, hey, I can do it. I'm responsible. I can control the factors. And that's not me making a judgment on you. That's me saying I have that too. That's me saying that virtually any entrepreneur that accomplishes something important has that. So the question is, for all of us hard-charging entrepreneurs and the people listening that would say, no, I can control that. I can do it. I can overcome it. If it goes wrong, it's my fault. Where am I responsible? Which is a great mindset to have, one of self-responsibility. How do you know when you actually just have to say, okay, hold on. This is not one I can control. This one is bigger than me.
So I think it's when you have a $25 million payroll and you know what you need to bring in to the day. And if it's not happening, and then all of a sudden one bank goes out of business, another bank goes out of business, another one shuts down, and it's a domino effect. And, there's only so much you can do. I mean, you have to know your metrics of your business. It's easy to do what you said, I think, if you're a really small player. But when you have big payroll, relatively big, lots of responsibility. I mean, then you're down 80% and you're smarter and more experienced and you have great people and nothing you're doing is going to work because you don't have anyone to sell the transactions, the loans to, right? That's kind of a problem.
So how often do you see, you're connected to so many business people across different industries, how often are you just watching someone go down with a burning, like on a burning boat, and you're just like, dude, get off the boat. And they're like, nope, I'm going to save it. And they don't have that, hey, this is bigger than me moment. Do you think you see that being a problem for people?
Yeah. So I think one of the, you hit on it. I think one of the characteristics of a successful entrepreneur, by the way, there's a definition to that. Okay. That's long-term success, not just, happy-go-lucky and they're good for a couple of years and then they go golfing every day and brag to everybody how smart they are. But like, if you actually understand in depth what they're talking about, you figure out pretty quickly that they have no idea about much anymore. They knew about what they knew for a short period of time. I see it a fair amount. It is one of those things that I think what made them successful in the beginning and for a while is also, it's a blessing, but it's also a curse. So if they don't manage that really intelligently, it could be really problematic. It's like anything, right? When we're human beings, we're expected to know everything and all this other things. But the truth is, like, you know what you know. If you're smart, you know what you don't know, but you know who does. And that's kind of like, I don't know. I think for me, it was kind of a blessing. I mean, I'll give an example. Everybody says bad things happen in threes. When I opened F&F Properties that day, it's the same day I sold my last company. And it's the same day, the most important thing that's happened to me up until that point was my wife and I had our first son, first child, I should say, who was a son, named after my father who passed years ago. So I had three good things happen to me that day, January 3rd, 2012. I'd opened the company before that, but I hadn't actually opened it for business until January 3rd of 12.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So like, I look at it like this, the forces sometimes it's kind of like, I would take it back. I would even take it back a little bit. A lot of people talk about not having a real like deep interest in politics. And I think candidly, to say it's the nicest way I can, if someone wants to be a smart business person, they have to be paying attention to the politics. Why? Because it's the politics of things that affect your business. Sometimes it's nothing to do with you. But if the politics of things affect your business, for example, going back to the prior industry, we were the number one in every category. We were doing amazing. We weren't stupid with the money. We were having a good time, but we were killing it, beating everybody consistently. And then the politicians and the regulators, and they had their reasons. I'm not saying the reasons are bad, but it is the regulators in this case, which you see it today, by the way, they want less banks. Most large developed countries, developed economies only have a handful of banks. The United States, we have thousands of banks. The United States is not these other countries, and we have a much better entrepreneurial spirit than these other countries. That's why they're decaying, and we seem to always find our way. But you need some of these small and mid-sized banks to service the small business people. You just do. And the bigger banks won't do it because it's not worthwhile to them. And so what happens is you're seeing this play out. I mean, you know about First Republic, you know about Silicon Valley Bank. That's just a handful of them. That's nothing compared to what happened the last time. But you've seen this. If you look online and you look at banks in the United States, you look at how many there were over the time periods, we have way less today than we used to have. So that means that small businesses are only going to get squeezed much harder constantly because they don't have access to capital. That's the number one thing to grow a business. You have to have access to capital. You don't have it, you're toast. Because when the bad times come, you have to have the ability to have some kind of cushion because it takes forever to build up a great team and everything else. Now, if you're going to, like me, if you have the pleasure of losing 80% of your business in a year, that wasn't exactly fun. And it was, no matter what we did, it wouldn't have mattered. We were the tallest of the midgets, as I like to say, but we still were midgets.
So you just mentioned when the bad times come. Earlier, you mentioned that when you were looking for your new industry, which ended up being multifamily.
Yeah.
You said that you wanted to analyze it from the perspective of how these different sectors perform
Sure.
when the economy goes to hell.
Yes.
So let's just sit there for a quick moment, because I think, we have people listening from all different industries. And that's what I love about this podcast is that it doesn't matter that you're in multifamily and the person listening is in technology. It doesn't matter if they're in hospitality. It doesn't matter what they're in. These are universal business principles. Why is that important? And why does your mind go there to analyze it from that perspective?
Because, well, to me, it's just logic. It's just simple. It's like, what are all the things that can go? I analyze everything and what are all the things that can go wrong, and how does the industry perform during that time period? My objective is to beat the industry in anything that I'm doing to the best of my ability, and have a team that we have a really good team here, really good. But to do it consistently, same thing. I'll give an example. The last time multifamily did really bad in San Diego County, which is our market, was in the early 90s, 1991. Okay. The reason that it happened was because we had the first Persian Gulf War to fight, and our economy wasn't as diversified. So we had to send off our Marines to go win the war. So you had a lot less demand for apartments. Okay. Well, that was the last time we've really had a lot of pain in this industry. That's been a long time. Yeah. And so I look at it from a standpoint of, okay, that's great. Okay, what are the other things? I look at things like most of the buildings in San Diego County, 85% of them are 31 unit buildings or less. 3%, just 3, is 100 unit plus buildings. So the dynamics of this market is it's an entrepreneur's market, because institutional buyers, which there's almost none, institutional investors, there's not very many here, is they can't get a big enough platform. And the other thing you look at is back to sales velocity. San Diego County, this year has been pretty lousy for sales, but generally speaking, it's going to be 300, 450 transactions a year. That's 5 units or greater. That's different than 4 units or less.
Right.
4 units or less is residential financing. That's like the easy stuff. Okay. That's the emotional buyers. That's like the piece of cake stuff.
Leave those to me, Dan.
It does. What's that?
Let me deal with those guys. You just leave them with me.
God bless you.
All right.
The 5 units or greater is different because the financing is different. You're only fixed for 5 years to 10 years. In residential, you can be fixed for 30 years. It's one of the privileges of being in America, and it's a wonderful thing, and it's great because it gives people an opportunity for financial freedom, right? So you have, in this marketplace, you have very few real institutional buyers, very few real institutional owners, so it's mostly entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, it's one of the misnomers of policymakers. When they're looking at the market, they actually are not studying the numbers or the data or the facts. So some might say are uneducated, and some choose to not be educated because it's politically popular. But it's kind of foolhardy because at the end of the day, if their goal is to help people, for example, the term affordable housing, I love that term because everybody wants affordable housing. But what it actually means, it's government subsidized housing. That the banks subsidize the financing because that's the only way the banks will be able to get access to capital from the government. So they charge less, charge me more to provide subsidized living accommodations. That's affordable housing. I do middle class workforce housing. So I'm the one who's dealing with all the regular people, right? I'm not saying the other people are irregular. I don't mean that, but I just deal with people, sad working people, so, young people working their butts off, families, trying to make ends meet, and we're all over the county, and that's what we specialize in. We have some stuff that's more highbrow, but for the most part, it's workforce housing. It's middle class. What you consider middle class, San Diego has an extremely high area median income. Interestingly enough, people talk about rents being so high, and they're right, but what they don't talk about is that the area median income is significantly higher than it has been also. It's actually the same ratio as it's always been. And then they talk about housing being a problem, and they're right, by the way. But then they don't bifurcate, separate out that for sale housing is extremely different than apartment housing. Yeah, it's housing, it's homes, but one somebody owns it and the other one somebody rents it. They're two completely different animals. The reason we don't see a lot of for sale housing, again, well-intended policy, but after the financial crisis, the policymakers want to protect everybody. I get it. They put in place something called construction defect liability. We've all heard about it. Well, the problem with it is it doesn't have caps. So because it doesn't have caps, small developers, and by the way, let's take a step back. San Diego County, 84% of the land in San Diego County, 84% is owned by one government agency or another.
Right.
The corporate landlord is the government. 16%, 3% is commercial, and 13% is some form of residential. So there isn't a lot of land because the government's not going to give up any of the land. If they do, it's only for the quote unquote affordable housing, but it's not for middle class housing. And so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but that's, hey, they're the big owner. They get to do what they want. Fine. I get it. But there's a big misnomer. The reason we don't have starter homes being built in San Diego is because the folks who build starter homes can't afford the insurance, if they can get it, to deal with the future lawsuits, because the insurance companies, and we've seen this play out this year, don't trust California on how they implement insurance policy. This has been happening for a while. So people can't buy starter homes. It's because of these unintended consequences. California, 50% of the cost in California for housing, by the way, is the bureaucracy part of it. Now, you need some for sure. Think of it like this. A house that costs $1 million, the real cost is probably close to $500,000, but the other $500,000 is dealing with all the bureaucracy and getting through the whole system. These are not my numbers. This is statistical facts. Yeah. So the real issue, going back to politics or government, is people have to be engaged to understand where some of the bottlenecks really are. And then the question is, what can we do about it? Right? And San Diego, frankly, what concerns me, what worries me specifically, we have, again, for the third time, we already have rent control in San Diego. Now we have same actors as last time trying to push rent control again. Now, why that matters is they would take what is already a very tough business and take the margin from this, okay, to nothing. And maybe not nothing. I'll give you an example of a similar policy that got passed in the state of New York. New York City today, and we have people there who own the properties for much longer than here. So it's third generation, second, fourth generation. Here, it's usually first or second generation. So it's different. But there, you have 90,000 empty apartment rentals. Here's the kicker. They need housing. Do you know why they're not rented? They're not rented because it's cheaper to not rent them.
Cheaper to keep them vacant.
Than it is to deal with the bureaucracy. That's when you know you have a problem. And what's happening in the state of New York and in New York City, you have a huge outflow of people because of all this stuff is all playing out. We've seen the same thing happen in the state of California. We've lost 1 million people. That's never happened in California before. Never. That should wake people up. San Diego's been much better. We've lost some, nothing like that. But I worry about it because my last business was, this business we've got called 60 people, including part-time folks.
Yeah.
And my last business, I had hundreds of people. How you would grow a business in San Diego to a nice, good size for a sustained period of time, or in California, it seems almost impossible. And the reason is you can't produce more housing because it's so hard to do. And it is. You can't create more for sale housing because of the laws. That's why things are $1.5 million, $1.25 million in the new construction, because that's the only way they can afford the insurance. And it's only the big players. So the people talking about protecting the little guy have put the little guys out of business. In terms of for sale housing developers, we're less than 50% of what we had before the financial crisis.
Really?
So that's a major problem.
This is one of these forces that might be bigger.
Yes. Here's another one. If people in the real estate world, it's interesting. People who own homes that are not subject to rent control, a quarter of them are for rent control. But here's the kicker. It's a little less than a quarter. So there's on the ballot, there is a no on 33. That's why everybody has to vote no on 33. If you can do math, I'm going to give it to you very simple. Everybody who owns a home in San Diego, it's going to go down 25%. Let me repeat that. If that passes, that's what's going to happen. So you can forget about that, and even worse, about anybody losing equity value. I'm going on record. And even worse than that, businesses won't be able to expand or sustain themselves because no one will be able to build any housing because of the unintended consequences of rent control. Interestingly enough, the people who are against rent control, it's Senate Pro Temp Tony Atkins, okay, running for governor. She's got a real good shot. She's against it. Oh, she happens to be a Democrat, by the way. I'm by the way I look at anything, I look at for people who have a brain and can do math. Because if you can do math and you have a brain and you're not so overconfident in everything that you do, and you realize you know what you know, but you need to find the people who know a little bit more than you, then that to me is somebody who's actually smart. So this policymaker actually understands. And I'm a big proponent of any policymaker. I don't care what their title is. I'm a big proponent of anybody who actually understands how business actually works and what's important and what you can't do, particularly if you want more housing. Like we're behind on our regional housing numbers that we're mandated to have. The reason we're behind is because of all of the bureaucracy that's in there. The people who are enforcing the bureaucracy are following the law. Sure. But someone needs to take a step back and go, wait a minute. If we're trying to go from A to B, and now people are having to go from A to B and B to C and C to D and D to E, then wait a minute, we need to reevaluate what can we do to be helpful here. I'll give an example. If you go to the funny little example, go to the dump and ask them how busy they are with demolition. You're going to hear that they're quiet. The reason they're quiet is no one's doing much. The reason they're not doing much is because there's now a concern about California about how do you plug in the next rules or laws they're going to put in place from an investment standpoint. And what's going to end up happening, you already see it play out in the real world on the insurance market. They already left the state. It's not worth it. And so I'm hoping that folks understand it's no on 33 and yes on 34. And the people who agree with no on 33, it's the NAACP, it's a carpenters union, it's the business people, it's anybody who's thinking about the future. Sometimes I've heard people say, oh, wait a minute, this is great because we're going to have disruption in market, we're going to have less competition. I go, oh, yeah, that's really great. I go, but if we have too much disruption, it's too hard for people. The young kids who are up and coming can't get into the business, which means that's a bad result for the industry as a whole because you need to have succession. You need to have other people bringing new ideas, creative things, whether it's ground up and redevelopment, rebuilding units, all of it. Anyway, sorry to talk your ear off, but like I really believe policy matters.
No, man, it's a huge wake up call, and I think there's an example of what easily could be maybe a headline or a buried headline that you just sort of skim by, but with big consequences and that being in the real estate space. But you have to be aware that no matter what industry you're in, because there is the equivalent in your industry, right? Like that is for sure. The equivalent exists in your industry. In fact, in the tech space, I haven't heard much talk about it anymore. And we won't get lost on that because it's outside of, I think, both our expertise. But there was the whole, remember when they were going to control the internet, you remember what I'm talking about and the huge consequences that would have had for all of the tech companies. And so, Dan, shifting gears a little bit.
Sure.
Just as a business person, okay, we're going to get a little bit into the wisdom side here of just general business advice, but passed down from somebody who's just done really well across different industries. In fact, in your case, how do you determine if a concept or an idea is worth pursuing versus it being a distraction or a shiny object, a squirrel? Because as business people, as business growers, developers, entrepreneurs, we
get bored.
We are attracted.
We get bored.
We get bored. In fact, we love getting work. I mean, I tell you, if you've got a great sales pitch, I love listening to it and I love buying. I can't not buy when there's a great sales pitch. But anyway, more so than someone trying to sell you something to you, there's so many possibilities, so many ways to do business. So how do you know if you see a real opportunity versus a distraction, a squirrel, a shiny object?
It's a great question. I think I've come to the conclusion that I wish I had 10 lives to live.
Yeah.
And I've only got one. And for me, it's got to be a worthwhile thing without sacrificing the integrity of the business, the core business itself. Very few people are able to do multiple businesses successfully. Very few. It's very rare. Again, it goes back to, if you think of it, I look at like the failure rates, right? So if you go back to, hey, I got into something because, by the way, I love what I do. We get to take stuff that's completely old, dilapidated, and completely rebuild it, build more housing, do more stuff. Like we get to do some really cool, fun stuff. The journey to get to that part, what I just described, that part sucks, but it's great. It's super rewarding. What I would say is I found that it's back to the same thing. It's the inverse of what you asked earlier, which is you said, look, how do you know when it's time to like throttle back and this market force is bigger than you? I think you have to be able to take a step outside of yourself and go, what got me to this point and what's going to take to sustain myself? Do I have the things in place for it to continue? And you may, which is awesome, but you're going to have to put in a tremendous amount of energy, and all you have is time. A buddy of mine, he said something to me when I was in my 30s. He said, basically explained, you have one life to live. We've all heard that before, right? His point, he had a saying. I'm trying to think what the saying was. It's actually good, really good. And I think about it, although it's not coming to me right now with you. It wasn't time value of money. It wasn't that. It was like, look, how are you going to spend your time? You only have so much time on this earth. And, do you want to spend your time doing stuff you enjoy or not? If you worked hard and you're fortunate enough to be in a good business, we live in the best country in the world. We have opportunities here we would never have anywhere else. That's the truth. I don't care what anybody says. Let's just go through the numbers together, and then just they'll become an avowed mathematician because they can do 1 + 1 = 2. And it's just, can they take a step back and be honest with themselves? And can they say, can I do multiple things successfully? And to me, there are things you can do that touch your business, so that makes sense, right? There is other things that are completely opposite, and it doesn't mean you can't learn. I look at business as just a language. One of my mentors told me that. He goes, Dan, it doesn't matter. There's this term for this term for that. It all means the same thing. It's don't overcomplicate it. You know, sometimes people like to use terminology to sound really smart, because if they're really smart, they know how to communicate with people so that people they're talking to actually understand. He goes, it's just a language. You just got to learn the language. That's it. You know, if you know Spanish, you can learn Italian. If you know Italian, you can learn Spanish. Maybe you could learn Portuguese. I mean, it made sense to me what he said. And so I think a lot of people just have to take a step back and just ask the question, are they willing to do what it takes? And then they need to think through, in my opinion. They can do whatever they want. The way I would look at it is, okay, it took me X amount of time and years. Mm-hmm. And it's back to the Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours plus. Okay? Those 10,000 hours plus have to be invested to become expert at something. And how are you going to do that if you're working in a regular company, 60, 70, 50 hours, 40, whatever? How are you going to do that? All of a sudden, you're just going to create this other 10,000 hours? I mean, I did the math. If you really work hard, you can do it. That's the only thing you focus on in 3 years, 3.5 years. Okay? But I think it's really hard to do. Now, there's people who've done it. And a lot of times it has to do with, they were smart. They were in the right place at the right time, took advantage of it. But it is almost universal that most people fail at that.
You know what you have me thinking about is, I don't know if we can use the word ever yet as I'm developing the thought, but you have me thinking about the idea that most things that are an opportunity. Because the question I ask is, how do you know if you're looking at an opportunity, a true opportunity, or a distraction? I could have been looking at the very opportunity that you took. I could be looking at the opportunity of growing a multifamily business. You've proven that it was a great opportunity.
Yes.
But
my timing was great.
But it could be that it was an opportunity for you. You were willing to do all that had to be done.
I went into it being scared, Dan.
And the same thing might be a distraction for me.
Yes.
If I'm not willing to do all of which has to be done, if I'm just like, oh, multifamily, that sounds amazing. I've heard it on the podcast. I should just do that. Well, listen, It could be, but you better be ready to do all that Dan did. Then it's an opportunity. If not, it's a distraction.
100%. And I would say that I went into this, I should have said this, because of, and it's back to your original thing, because I lost 80% of my business like that. I went in and I knew a lot of people who were very successful that they confused the success with that with knowledge on everything else. And they would go and they would just go invest money and they become real estate guys and they go and they talk and blah, 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 blah. They're usually the first guys to get smoked when things get squirrely. So I saw it over time. Most people are not good with money. They don't know how to make it. They don't know how to invest it. Not really, they don't. Sure. Very few. And they don't know how to sustain it. And even more rare, sustain it and grow it. So I went into it completely scared out of my mind that I have to learn a different way of thinking about things. It's back to understanding the cycles. And, one of the things about real estate is it's a very slow moving business, but, so I had to train myself to think differently and to, maybe the word is humble myself, to talk to people who've been doing it for a long period of time to hear their stories. Right? It's interesting. It's, the other part of it is a lot of people don't understand that at the end of the day, the real estate business is a people-to-people business. Doesn't matter what aspect of it. And I was able to, which I didn't know that in the beginning, I was able to apply some of the same skills that I acquired through the prior business to apply them to this business in terms of understanding who the influencers are and how to build relationships with them. Well, they're very similar to the top salespeople, and I had 130 of them, very similar to those folks. So once I connected those dots, I'm like, oh, okay, these are hard-charging, hard-working people. They don't make any money unless there's something happens. Don't waste their time. Always tell them thank you. Always do what you say you're going to do. Always. And over time, I got rewarded. It took me years before I started to get opportunities that others won't get. Guys would get into the business. I remember when I got into the business, I made money before, some money, made more money when I sold the company. But I remember thinking like, oh yeah, I got the money. Like, this is great. I realized I was like one of the poor ones. In relative terms. And because it's people who had started 20 years before me, 30 years before me, 35 years before me.
Sure.
And so I realized, oh, wow, I have to have a different approach here because everybody thinks that if they have the money that they can just go do this or that. Well, if it's a really great asset, it's not that simple. Yeah, they might think that they know what they're talking about. Sure. But there's a reason why people who do this for a living all the time, doing it all the time because you have to. It's a small margin business. So you have to be good at it.
And it's really good. Really good.
And Danny, I have four minutes.
I'm going to end you with the last question here. You've just crushed the day. You do what you've done. You're right. You've been at work, putting out fires, fighting wars, like doing all that has to be done. Take us to the moment that most men and women who have a big day of work like that, slaying dragons, and at some point we have to make the transition to go home. And so how do you manage a transition of being at work, doing what you do, and then walking into your house and becoming dad, husband, and likely just a completely different character than the one that you've just spent 8, 9, 10 hours playing through the rest of the day? And it's a common struggle. Everyone has to overcome. Most people have to learn to overcome. Yeah. So what nugget of wisdom, and look, I'm sure not to put any words in your mouth, but if you're anything like me, I still make a mistake even on like, man, I know better. So what have you learned that you could pass on?
When you find the person that has learned how to do it well, and actually is not full of crap, I'd love to talk to them on how to do it because I feel I have a big area to improve upon. I have 4 kids. For me anyway, it's very hard to turn it off. I have not. Sometimes I'm better. I'm better more often than not, but I'm not anywhere near where I really feel like I should be. So if you interview somebody or talk to somebody that you think has really got it dialed in, I would love to talk to them to get their advice.
Well, I'm going to forward you that episode when it comes up, but here's where the flowers I'm going to give you for the answer you just gave. You just displayed a key reason. I know for sure a key reason for a lot of your success, because it's a key reason for any success has to be rooted in a large degree of self-awareness. And what Dan just displayed, and I just want to I want to highlight this. I don't want it to go just understood or maybe you heard it at a subconscious level. I want to elevate this for you listening at a conscious level that he just displayed self-awareness. And there is no improvement that can really be made in any kind of sustainable, meaningful way without it. And so I just love that, man. That in and of itself is amazing. Is amazing. So appreciate you coming on. And thank you for, these are the conversations, guys, that you've just heard that I've gotten to enjoy in private with Dan over all these years. And just I've always felt privileged to have. And so it's just a pleasure to have you on and share that with the audience.
Danny, thank you. Thanks for everything that you're doing. I'll talk to you soon. Be good. And love to see how this thing comes. And when we find that person, please send it to me.
I'll get done taking all the notes for me because I need the notes. And then I'll forward them over. We all need them. That's why I asked the question.
I know. I don't have I wish. Anyway, Danny, thank you. Be good, my friend.
You got it.